Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Winston Cowie, IUCN Snapper, Seabream and Grunt Specialist Committee Member and Manager of Marine Conservation and Fisheries at Neom Nature Reserve in Saudi Arabia. I am from New Zealand. I've been involved in marine conservation and fisheries for a wee while, mostly in the Arabian region, and it is here that we've found this treasure trove of information amongst our fishing communities, and you'll hear some examples of that and how it transitions through to policy in today's talk. So this session 4, is entitled Policy and Management Actions, the Roles of Fishers' Knowledge, and we're going to look at successful case studies from all over the world. The session will last for an hour and a half. The first hour will be presentations. We'll then have 15 minutes Q&A, and this is the final session, so we'll have a 15-minute closing from all of our co-panelists. We will actually have a repeat session in 3 hours' time for different time zones, so it's not quite the last session, but it's the last session in this session. So we are going to hear some wonderful case studies from Seychelles, South Africa, the Caribbean, Arabia. We're going to delve into the IUCN guidelines for fishers' knowledge and policy development for applied use. We're also going to hear about the Gladding Memorial Award from some of our former winners. So really looking forward to that, and have really enjoyed hearing from the likes of you, Mitch, and Don Dana Maria over the last couple of days. Finally, my co-presenters, Dr. Will Heyman, Dr. Lindeman, Dr. Samuelis and Fadila Ali will close the session. So for the first talk, we are going to hear from two of my co-panelists and absolute legends in the game. Firstly, Dr. Ken Lindeman, co-chair of the IUCN Snapper, Seabream and Grunt Specialist Group. He's had an illustrious career at Florida Tech, and he's just retired. And I've got to say, it's probably the busiest start to retirement ever. So well done, Ken. We're also going to be hearing from Dr. Will Heyman, who's done an incredible amount of work on sporting aggregations all over the world in the US, Honduras, and Belize. So without further ado, let's hear from Dr. Will and Ken. Their talk is entitled Management Measures in Institutions, Diversity and Opportunities. Forwards.
Welcome to our presentation on management measures and institutions, diversity and opportunities. We appreciate your time. The context is in part captured in the image on the left. In English, more effort, less fish. This is from 2001, periodical for boaters and fishers in Puerto Rico. On the right, locally and regionally, successful long-term fishery management has often proven elusive or worse. There are particularly logical management opportunities. Fish spawning aggregation forming species can be standalone markets or are often parts of multi-species fisheries. Either way, spawning aggregation protection can offer doable actions to sustainably manage important fisheries while working more closely with fisherfolk communities. The landscape, seascape that this is embedded within involves multi-scale management connectivity characterized by many layers of diverse institutional systems across many scales as shown in the figure from Mahone et al. 2009. At the quote smallest scale on the bottom, local and national scale institutional diversity and knowledge structures within all of those institutions and all of the stakeholders intersecting with them can keep folks' hands very full. And then of course there's folks working at even higher levels, and even if you're not trying to work at higher levels, higher level issues can cascade to your level, and vice versa. Fisheries and their components reflect dozens of overlapping complex adaptive systems, CASs. This can be people, species of fishes, life stages of fishes, economies, coral reefs, fisherfolk communities, agencies, and on. Attributes of CASs: inherent nonlinearity, unpredictability, the ability to adapt and learn, the ability to emerge new systems. Management for resilience of FSAs depends on managing overlapping networks of CASs, which have these above attributes. The literature on this is really refreshing time after time. An important paper from the Caribbean, but meaningful beyond is the Mahone et al. 08 paper on the top right, and some other very interesting papers that reinforce and expand in their own way on this overall topic are below. Mahone et al. Summarize a lot of important diversity that's difficult to summarize in this figure 1 from the paper referred to. Characteristics of less and more complex fisheries chains on the left and right. So we see this across socioeconomic, cultural, geographic, political landscapes. There's different spectra and placement of institutions across different spectra that often reflect economic resources, as shown by one of the red boxes below. And attributes here are focused to the left on mainly large-scale fisheries, and on the right mainly small-scale fisheries, the box on the bottom in red. And within those categories, multi-species fisheries on the right, etc. Folks know this kind of structure in many cases. There's a variety of ways in which it's represented. The bottom line is these fisheries are so diverse, and that includes FSA fisheries, with lots of factors structuring institutional opportunities. A really nice paper relevant to this issue set is by Fulton. This is Institutional Amnesia Pushes Fish Spawning Aggregations Towards Extirpation. Examples of management challenges involving complexity abound, and the focus here is institutional amnesia, a concept in business management, has direct applications to FSAs that are unpacked in this paper. IA can contribute to suboptimal outcomes for FSAs unless measures are taken to ensure transfer of agency institutional knowledge, particularly over time. A lot of CAS thinking and resilience thinking is focused on dynamic, long timescales. FSA management measures, there's so many. This slide captures 3 categories. These categories could be debated, but we feel that they organize a lot of major options that are out there and have been used for FSA management directly or indirectly. So this includes seasonal closures, gear restrictions, MPAs with spatially closed MPAs for FSAs and migratory routes, rotating closures, etc. Harvest quotas. This is often supply side, very agency-driven management where the resources can be available. On the right, community-based management, ancient in some cases in terms of its ancestral phylogeny to now. Locally managed marine areas, customary tenure, territorial use for fishing. Some of these components are quite new and cutting edge in terms of dynamics, and some are based on very old and powerful concepts that go, some of this was summarized in Johannes' Words of the Lagoon. Other community-based management tools exist, many. They're being developed as we speak. And then also demand side, change the markets. What can the business sector do, since it's so all-powerful in so many ways, to reverse the pulls on these large feedback structures in terms of system science? Examples are provided: dive tourism, including sustainable seafood certifications with more of a focus perhaps on species with overfished FSAs, etc. Management measures are often best in adaptive combinations, not just combinations of management measures, but adaptive combinations that recognize the CAS underlying structure and allow for change. There's many management challenges, but many resources are limited. Choosing where to work is very important. Priorities based on fisheries and diversity were developed in a really interesting report by Fulton et al. The citation is up top. In this matrix below from that report, the left rows are different attributes of fisheries and diversity. Then across the top columns, those are priority ranks and defined, and then the justification for those priorities. And you see that you've got examples like for abundance tendency on the far right, the top red oval, sites with downward tendencies in abundance require more urgent action. So priority there can be scaled to help make important decisions strategically. Another example on the importance of larval connectivity and or absence of connectivity is below as well. A lot of interesting tools out there. Examples of FSA protection with a snapper Seabream grunt focus include, this is not inclusive, the West Atlantic, a variety of countries which have successful or relatively successful management of FSAs are listed. The Cayman Islands, well known for the grouper, innovations. Belize, well known for innovations with multiple species, etc. In the Indian Ocean, examples. In the Pacific Ocean, important examples from remarkably diverse systems. Notice that for each ocean, we've got the word others at the bottom because there's others. And it would be very interesting to stratify and expand this array of lists. Locally managed marine areas in Kenya are examples of community-based management that are very interesting and powerful. This slide summarizes work in Kenya by Dr. Melita Samoilis. LMMAs there are typically called co-management areas and are managed by beach management units. Challenges include financing, community capacity, enforcement, and compliance. Another example of approaches from different system perspectives, the FAO, Western Central Atlantic Fishery Commission Spawning Aggregation Work Group, developed a spawning aggregation management plan for Nassau grouper and mutton snapper in the entire Caribbean. This plan is focused on a select life history event, spawning aggregations. The status of plan implementation will be presented later in this session by Dr. Yvonne Sadovy with the focus on the mutton snapper. Innovation is present in terms of communication via this remarkable partner, the Big Fish Initiative. Another example of management issues involving FSAs and opportunities that occurs often when you look around the literature in various oceans is when you have spawning areas that are next to MPA boundaries for various reasons. In this case, Northeast Brazil mutton and dog snappers. This image shows the relative proportion of CPUE of the two species in Northeast Brazil. The green area is an MPA. This work by Dr. Beatrice Padovani and her colleagues is continuing, and they're now working on potentially extending the boundaries of the MPA to include some of these or all of these FSAs. Another approach from the business side, the demand side, is dive tourism on FSAs to, if done right, protect them. In Palau, the Full Moon Expeditions operation, as well as a variety of other businesses and local institutions are involved with spawning aggregation related tourism. The twin spot snapper spawning aggregation, Lucianus bohar, is the most prominent example. There are benefits in terms of potential reductions in fishing, generating funds for management, raising awareness. Concerns include what is the carrying capacity? Can the aggregations take this over time? The development of codes of conduct and the need for research on impacts to FSAs. There's a lot of interesting literature on this. Best practices to build capacity for monitoring and management include direct applications of the ecological resilience literature occur via things as seemingly simple as workshops that involve training on resource monitoring, or fisher exchanges among islands or among oceans. The idea is to connect fishers, managers, researchers from all oceans to amplify our learning and adaptive capacity. Future directions include training workshops and fisher exchanges, more sustainability incentives for fishers, for example, GMA models in other regions, regional and national priority setting, a more diverse audience. This can be scaled in many dimensions. Simple, repeatable diagnostic methods for monitoring to support conservation, and more. Thank you for your time. Thanks to the managers, fishers, scientists, and others working to improve the long-term resilience of coastal fisheries for the collective good.
Thank you so much, Professor Ken and Dr. Will. You guys have just got so much knowledge, and I think we've all been learning a huge amount from you over the last few days, and just so good to know that there's so many successful examples of spawning aggregation protection all over the world. You mentioned the Atlantic, Pacific, Brazil. I love the Palau ecotourism example. There's some really, really good things happening. So next we have a talk by myself. It's on the IUCN Fishers Knowledge Guidelines and transitioning fishers knowledge through to policy. We developed it a couple of years ago, and it's all about the what is fishers knowledge, why gather it, and how to do that. There are a number of organizations involved in that. So just a big shout out to the IUCN groups that were the Species Survival Commission, Snapper, Seabream and Grunt Group, the Commission on Environment, Economic and Social Policy, Environment Agency Abu Dhabi, my dear friends there, Sustainable Use and Livelihood Group, and the World Forum for Fisher People. So lots of people from all over the world, over 50, contributed to these guidelines. Let's hear about them. Hi, Winston Cowie, IUCN Specialist Group Member for Snapper, Seabream and Grunts. In this session, we explore the IUCN guidelines for the gathering of fishers' knowledge for policy development and applied use. Developed by 50 experts from 15 countries, these guidelines give practical and clear advice and make it easier for users to recognise and include fishers' knowledge as an important data stream in resource management. You might be a government entity, a research organisation, a researcher, an NGO. These guidelines can be used by everybody. And if you need information, regional experts' names from all over the world are included in the guidelines. So if you do need more information, just reach out. It's there, it's on hand, and people are happy to help. Big picture, the guidelines are intended to promote the recognition, gathering, and recording a baseline of traditional fishing knowledge. Value, recognise, and encourage the transfer and preservation of this knowledge. Involve fishers in enhancing and applying this knowledge today, and provide a framework of how and how we can use this knowledge in fisheries policy, but also enhance it in society today. And that is, of course, recognising that it has its own intrinsic cultural value. Definitions. Let's talk about definitions. What is fishers' knowledge? Let's be clear. So there's many different definitions of fishers' knowledge, from traditional ecological knowledge to traditional knowledge to local ecological knowledge to indigenous fishers' knowledge to all sorts. So for our guideline, we looked across all of these definitions and we tried to make the best one that was most widely applicable. So there's a couple of key things on the definition of fishers' knowledge. So fishers' knowledge includes indigenous and traditional knowledge, but also experience-based knowledge. So this could be a member of a tribe who holds this knowledge, or it could be a community member on a coastline who's been involved in fishing for a long period of time. And so when we talk about fishers' knowledge, we can refer it to as living, because it is constantly changing and evolving. So what are some of the drivers for gathering fishers' knowledge? Well, the International Law and Policy Framework supports us, from the CBD to the SDGs. So if you are looking for a reason for support the gathering of fishers' knowledge, then look no further than the International Law and Policy Framework. Next step, how do you gather fishers' knowledge? And we've developed this into two phases. The first phase one is setting objectives. What are your objectives? Gathering the fishers' knowledge and recording a baseline of fishers' knowledge. And the second is using this knowledge in fisheries management and fisheries policy, and looking to enhance it as well. Complete your locality literature review. What's been done on this subject in the past, and identify what information you want to gather. And it can be really wide, or it can be quite narrow on and be on just a fisheries management question. But megafauna as well, dolphins, dugongs, whale sharks, sawfish. That's a good one for elasmobranch lovers. You can gather so much information on historic presence and absence of species. So who should you start with? Who should you start gathering fishers' knowledge from? So in indigenous communities, traditionally the chief or elder wisdom holders, and you go and speak with them and be respectful, be authentic, and layers of contacts, snowballing, gathers momentum, and you end up speaking to the right people. And women have a really big role to play in this, and we've got a great case study in the guidelines on women mollusk gatherers in Costa Rica who were really tuned into the estuaries and the systems that they worked in, particularly around mangroves. So there's a really good case study in the guidelines on women being the champions of this knowledge. And don't go in with any sort of preconceived sample size. It doesn't work like that. You go there and you meet the leaders, and then I guess it snowballs from there. It's a pretty awesome and interesting and rich cultural journey. Type of engagement. So there are generally 4 types of engagement, and they all work, and you've got to just work out what works for you in the context, and depends on your objectives. But so how to start, state your purpose, why you're there, be authentic. Like, I think people can tell if you're authentic or not, so just keep it real, and develop an understanding with the fisher's knowledge holder. Consent and ethical considerations is a key point, and the World International Intellectual Property Organization, they've developed a checklist on how to do that, and that's included in the guideline. So look, there's some many different questions you can ask. It just really depends on what your objectives are, and I'd say start slowly. You don't want to rush these things, and you might be talking to one gatekeeper for half a day, a couple of days. It does take time. And look, as a fisheries manager, think about what traditional elements could be included in your future fisheries management system. And I think New Zealand's a really good example of that. If a tribe can show they've got ahika or home fires over an area, then they can actually manage that resource in that locality on behalf of everybody, on behalf of all of New Zealand, and particularly the people in that area. And that's a model that's worked really well in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, one bit of advice: please, once you've obtained the consent of the people or persons you're interviewing, video it, film it, because you will capture a generation of knowledge. And I've been able to do this a number of times, thankfully, in my lifetime, from talking about shipwrecks, these old shipwrecks on New Zealand's coasts, to the fishers' knowledge within the United Arab Emirates. And in doing so, you capture a generation. And many of the people who I've interviewed in the past have passed on now, but we've got this this record, this visual video record of them telling their stories, their songs, sharing their heart, and that knowledge isn't lost. So please, video your baseline of traditional knowledge. In terms of developing fisheries policy, there's a number of different policy frameworks you can follow, but it really depends on the policy development process in your jurisdiction, and neck of the woods. But you should really understand the driver's pressure state impact and response, or DAPSI worm as it's now known, when you are developing fisheries policy. The UN FAO has recently come out with this fisheries management approach called the ecosystem-based approach to fisheries management. It's a really good one, and it involves sitting with the fishing community, setting objectives, working together to identify what the issues are across environment, social and governance, and the ability to achieve what it is that you want to achieve. Then together the group goes through and workshops the high priority issues, medium priority issues, and low priority issues, and then focuses on those high priority issues and works out a fisheries management plan to achieve those. So it's a really useful process to follow, and it takes time, but it's a really good way to do things. And traditional ecological knowledge is, you know, one of these key core concepts embedded within it. So now, you should have a really good understanding of the IUCN guidelines on fisheries knowledge. You should understand what fisheries knowledge is, why it's important, how you gather that, and the guidelines provide lots of information on that, and how it can be used in fisheries policy in lots of different places around the world. So many case studies in there. There's also the names of experts in each region. So if you are looking for a steer, you are looking for a hand, or you'd like to talk to someone, please contact any of the experts contained within the guideline. Great. Well, nice speaking with you, and if anyone's got any questions at all, please feel free to contact me or any of the other IUCN trainers on LinkedIn or Instagram or wherever. Thank you. Ka kite, and in Arabic, Gadam, forwards. Gadam, forwards indeed. I'm not sure if it was for you, but for me it was a little bit wonky, like the audio was a little bit out, but I'm sure you could hear the audio and got that message. And once again, thank you to all of those experts and fishers and organisations from all over the world who contributed to the guidelines. For our next talk, we are heading to South Africa, and we're going to hear from Dr. Bruce Mann from the Oceanographic Research Institute in Durban. I mentioned his name this morning to a South African colleague, and she said, I know him. So he's very well known in South Africa. His talk is entitled The Biology and Management of the Critically Endangered 74 Seabream and this Endangered. It's a fantastic talk of decline, collapse, and hope. Dr. Bruce Mann, looking forward to the talk.
Good day. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the biology and management of the critically endangered 74 Seabream, Polystyganus angulosus, in South Africa. My name is Bruce Mann, and I'm a retired senior scientist at the Oceanographic Research Institute in Durban, South Africa. Here's a picture of the 74, which got its name from the old English man-of-war gunships. Apparently the lines along the body reminded the name of the cannon ports on those old ships. A quick species profile to the 74. It's an endemic sparrowed found along the southeastern coast of South Africa from Cape Town to about southern Mozambique, although the population has contracted a lot from historical levels. The maximum size, it grows to about 100 centimeters total length and a weight of about 16 kilograms, and we've aged them up to just over 20 years. It's a shoaling species which inhabits deep offshore reefs from about 40 meters right down to about 160 meters on the continental shelf. It's primarily piscivorous, feeds on pelagic species such as sardines and mackerel, but will also take benthic invertebrates. Juveniles appear to be fairly resident, but adults undertake a northeastward spawning migration each year from the southern parts of its distribution up into KwaZulu-Natal. It's a late maturing species, only maturing at 8 to 9 years of age and at a length of 65 to 75 centimeters fork length. Spawning occurs in spring, which is August to October, and very importantly, the adults form predictable spawning aggregations both in time and space along the KwaZulu-Natal coast. And I think this picture really tells the story of the 74 very clearly. In 1910, when the line fishery, so using hook and line to catch these species, the average catch was over 1,500 metric tons per annum. After the Second World War, in the 1950s, the catch had dropped to just under 400 tons, and towards the end of the 20th century in 1995, the total catch recorded was less than 2 tons, which is basically what we call economic extinction. Similarly, if you look at the bottom graph in the blue bars, percentage composition in 1910, 74 made up 70% of the fish caught along the KwaZulu-Natal coast, and that gradually diminished down to 1995, where it made up less than 1% of the species caught. So that tells you in a nutshell the history of what happened to the 74. So let's look at a bit of the history of research and management. What did we do about it? In the 1950s, fishermen were starting to realize that the catches were declining, and they asked the authorities to do something about it. It took a while, another 10 years, before a master's student at the Oceanographic Research Institute did her master's study on the biology of 74. But then it took another 20 years before some of her findings were implemented as regulations. So in 1985, the first fisheries regulations for 74 came out, which included a size limit of 25 centimeters, a daily bag limit of 5 fish per person per day, and a closed season for 3 months from September to November each year. In 1992, those regulations were reviewed because they weren't having much impact, and catches were continuing to decline. So the size limit was increased to 40 centimeters, the bag limit was dropped to 2, and they kept the closed season. And that was done in consultation with the fishing organizations or fishing bodies. In 1996, another master's student at ORI conducted the first formal stock assessment on 74, and this was based on otoliths that were collected in 1962-63 by Rosemary Ahrens. Charlie Matsau's study showed that in the 60s the population was probably down to about 25% spawner biomass, and by the time they did their study in the late 1990s, they estimated it was sitting at less than 5% spawner biomass per recruit. This resulted in 1998 in the implementation of a 10-year moratorium on catching 74. So the fishery was closed, and you were just not allowed to catch it, whether you were a commercial or recreational fisherman. 10 years later, or just 9 years later, I conducted a reassessment of the stock along the KZN coast and found very little sign of recovery. Very few fish, not much increase in size, and based on that study, which took a year to do, I recommended a further continuation of the moratorium for another 10 years. Then in 2009, we did the first red list assessment of the 74 with the other sparids. That was only published in 2014. And it was listed because of what you've seen on those graphs as critically endangered. The stock was greatly reduced from its historic size. In 2019, we had a number of new MPAs established along the South African coast, and we had rezoning of some of the existing ones. And the important one in the case of 74 was the Allowil Shoal MPA just south of Durban, where the northern part of the MPA was extended to include the Alovo Banks, which was a historical spawning area of the 74, and this was a seasonal closure to stop any fishing on the reefs during August, September and October each year. Then this year we've just finished doing the reassessment of the 74 using the IUCN criteria, and it came out as endangered. Basically because there are now very positive signs of recovery of 74 after 26 years of no fishing, but we still need to do a formal stock assessment to validate the observations probably using baited remote underwater video size frequencies from stereo brubs. And based on that information, hopefully we're going to find that indeed the stock has or is in the process of recovering, and we hope that we will be able to reopen the fishery to limited sustainable use in future. For any of you who are interested, I've added a website at the bottom of the screen where you can go to see the story that I've just presented very briefly. But thanks very much for your interest, and cheers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bruce. Love that story, the story of collapse and recovery, but 26 years, right? 26-year moratorium, that's how long it takes. So to go back to a quote from Bob Johannes yesterday, love this one: ignore fishers' knowledge and miss the boat. Love that. Right, moving on to our next presentation, we have Professor Yvonne Sadovy. Professor Yvonne, her reputation precedes herself. She's very well known in Asia and the Caribbean, where she's done some seminal work around spawning aggregations. You might recognize her when she comes on camera because she has been in Blue Planet 1 and 2. Look, the list here is long: 130 peer-reviewed papers, co-author of 6 books, and Professor Yvonne is going to be talking to us about the Regional Management Plan for the Mutton Snapper in the Caribbean. Professor Yvonne, if you may.
I'm very pleased to present the Regional Management Plan for Mutton Snapper fish spawning aggregations. I want to present briefly why we need them, how we would like to manage them, and what the time frame for this would be. Many snappers globally must aggregate to spawn to replenish their populations, and this includes the near-threatened mutton snapper. Spawning aggregations are increasingly the targets of uncontrolled fishing that devastates the catches from them, reduces the catches at non-aggregating times, because of course aggregations produce the eggs that feed the fisheries outside of aggregations, and also overfishing erodes non-extractive values, for example, ecotourism on these spectacular wildlife events. So it's very clear that spawning aggregations need to be safeguarded for both the fish and the fisheries they support, valued for their non-extractive potential, and as part of wider ecosystem-based management. An example of that is that whale sharks accumulate in Belize at times to feed on the eggs of some of the aggregations, and this is part of their natural biology. It was very interesting to me first working on aggregations because at the time, and as I discovered for centuries, buried lobster, in other words, female lobster with eggs, had been protected for a long time, and people understood the need to do it. When it came to spawning aggregations and aggregating fish, also full of eggs, it was much less easy to sort of change the perspective that these, instead of targets of fishing, needed to be protected for the eggs they produced for the fishery. So now is time to appreciate this and to move forward and actually protect them. Now, how do we want to do that? The management plan I'm very briefly outlining today was developed under a very broad partnership, which was under the Spawning Aggregation Working Group. And the management plan, which is FAO WCAFC, was approved in 2023. It has 6 objectives. It's a focus on aggregations, spawning aggregations, which is unusual. It has a regional management approach, which is somewhat unusual. And that addresses the fact that not only the eggs disperse widely, these are pelagic eggs, but also the adults migrate regularly across national boundaries. And so we need a regional approach to management. We also need measurements to assist fishers who are affected by management, address illegal fishing, to really increase capability for enforcement. So here's the plan. It covers mutton snapper and also the Nassau grouper, so 2 target species. I'm not going to read through these, but there are essentially 6 objectives. And what these cover are data collection, standardization of that data collection and monitoring frameworks, a harmonized approach, so a regional approach, very heavy pressure on, or very heavy interest to look at awareness and engagement, And I'm going to give you some amazing examples shortly, and also to look at how aggregations and planning fit into the ecosystem level of management and planning. So the next steps, how we're proceeding, and sort of some progress to date, that includes data collection and communications. So we have 3 pilot studies. These collect data and develop a sort of a standardized database that we hope that then can be applied more widely. And at the moment, the focus is Belize, Cuba, and the Bahamas. We are developing a scientific task force to provide advice for scientific studies and data collection. We have partnerships. The Spawning Aggregation Working Group continues its meeting, and it's been meeting for over 10 years. So progress is slow, but we're making progress. And the CRFM is just beginning to design capacity building and training for fishers in relation to spawning aggregation sites. And at the moment, there's been an amazing buildup of communications under the Big Fish Initiative. Please look it up. It's absolutely fantastic. This is a hub for outreach and education, and as a centralized sort of base for information of all kinds. It's hopefully a high impact campaign. It was developed under the WCAFC Spawning Aggregation Working Group, and its target are fishers, decision makers, and consumers, fish consumers, and it's trilingual. It's a beautiful site, beautiful pictures, wonderful materials. There's a lot of social media presence, and here you can see the major countries where we're seeing a big growth in social media take up. So really attracting attention and interest in aggregations, spawning aggregations. And just a few, in finishing, just a few products. So there are public service announcements, there are podcasts, films. There's a wonderful international released film. In the middle, you see there's actually a Mutton Snapper public service announcement. So from the perspective of scientists, fishers, and enforcers. So lots and lots of great materials. Thank you. Gracias. Merci.
Sorry, guys, just trying to click the mouse. Thank you very much, Professor Yvonne. And I believe there was a question in the chat around transboundary collaboration, and that's a really, really good example of that. On questions, please. We have one more talk left before we go to question and answers. So please put some Q&A in the chat. We've got some wonderful panelists who will help answer those. Next, we head to the Seychelles and a talk from Dr. Jude Bijoux, who is with us. Welcome, sir. Wonderful to have you here. Dr. Bijoux has been working as a fisheries scientist, consultant, and lecturer in the Seychelles for many, many years. His excellent presentation, is on the shoemaker spinefoot rabbitfish, which is an important fishery in the Seychelles, and he's seen spawning aggregations of up to 25,000 fish, which is pretty epic. Dr. Bijoux's presentation is entitled Seychelles Fishing Spawning Aggregation, Science and Management of a Key Artisanal Fishery, Siganidae. Dr. Bijoux.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session, during which I will be talking about the management of a spawning aggregation fishery in the Seychelles. My name is Jude Bijoux. I'm a fishery scientist. I am based in the Seychelles, and I used to work as a scientist with the Seychelles Fishing Authority. I am now working mostly as a consultant, and I'm involved in marine resource management initiatives. I lecture once a year at the University of Seychelles on the topic of monitoring and assessment of fish communities. The candidate species we'll be talking about today is the shoemaker spinefoot rabbitfish. It is an Indian Ocean species, herbivorous. It is gonochoristic, that is, it doesn't change sex from male to female or female to male. It is fast growing, reaches a maximum length of 45 centimeters, and is very important for the artisanal fishery in the Seychelles and throughout the Western Indian Ocean region. It forms aggregation around the full moon from September to April of every year. This is an example of an aggregation of Siganidae, the rabbit fish that we're talking about here. This aggregation could have what I've seen personally up to 25,000 fish. So the fishery and the aggregation. The aggregations are transient, and fish moves from the reef where they usually live to the spawning sites a couple of days before the full moon. The migration is usually between 1 to 3 kilometers from the sites that we know of. All of the spawning sites have particular characteristics in that they are all granite patch reefs found at depth of more than 18 meters. These sites tend to have low level of sedimentation or shifts in sand that can cover the reef. We found that at the sites there are segregation of fishing among the fishermen. So there is segregation of fishing sites. The fishermen that fishes a particular set of aggregation sites will not fish another particular set, let's say between the north and south of the island. The fishery has been going on for over 100 years, and until a few years ago, the only management measure that applied was a minimum trap mesh size. This is an example of one of the small boats and the bamboo traps that I use to target the aggregation of these species during the spawning period. This is an example of one of the fishers picking up one of the trap during a spawning aggregation. In terms of the location, the Seychelles is found in the Western Indian Ocean, just north of Madagascar and east of Kenya. Particularly, the work was done on the island of Praslin, which is the second largest island of the Seychelles, and it is an island where the fishery is well known, and fish from that fishery supplies a lot of other islands too. In terms of the spawning sites, the ones that we worked on, they are identified by these small diamonds. There are multiple of them. And there are much more that we have identified here or that we had worked on so far. In terms of fishers' involvement, this project had heavy involvement of the fishers. It was actually a project which was spearheaded by the fisher. They applied and got a grant of $50,000 US from the UNDP Small Grants Program to do research. And the first step of the work was to define the research question together with the fishers. The fishers were also responsible for all fishing and all transportation at sea that we did as part of this study. The executive committee of the association was responsible for steering the project, and all of the members of the association were responsible for reviewing the results that came out from the research and for proposing management measures. In terms of defining the question, the research question that is, the fishers had an important role. They wanted to know how many fish actually are present in this aggregation, how long does an individual fish would stay in an aggregation, whether they would stay the whole time that the aggregation is there or whether they would come and go. They wanted to know whether it was the same fish that spawns in the south on the certain reefs and the ones that spawns on the northern reefs. They wanted to know whether there were any kind of spawning site fidelity and whether an individual would actually spawn on every month during the season. They were also interested to know whether these fish actually learn where these spawning aggregation sites were and whether they are fast growing and how fast do they grow. We use mixed research methods as part of this study. We use acoustic tags, we use a lot of spaghetti tags, lots of scuba surveys, and also some translocation experiments. During that research, we were lucky to have at our disposal the SFA research vessel, the RV Amiche, which provided a good base for our work. In terms of the results, in terms of presence and absence, you will see that from these graphs, the vertical lines are the date of the full moon. And we see here that the aggregation are actually transient, so they form around the full moon period, and then just after that they dissipate. And here again, we see the same pattern again with fish coming to the site, spending usually less than a day, and then leaving, and then coming back the following month. We see that a particular fish would spawn on several months and consecutive months throughout the spawning period. In terms of arrival and departure, we see that at site 1 in the south, in the southern part of the island, the arrival and departure, arrival was slightly before the full moon, and departure was slightly after the full moon. On site 2, we find that arrival at the site was actually after the full moon, and departure was a couple of days after that. In terms of the timing of arrival and departure, we found that both arrivals and departures tended to be, arrival tended to be around sunrise, and departure tended to be around sunset. And we believe that this has something to do with the polarization of the sky. In terms of the formation of the spawning aggregations, we found that aggregation forms very fast. So you could go to the site on one day and there's no fish, and then on the next day you could have something like 25,000 fish. The scuba diving and the observation that we made there, the density calculations and the acoustic tagging, actually revealed some very important information. And we found out that the fish are represented by the vertical bars on the graph on the right hand side. They stay in the aggregation for less than the entire aggregation period. So if an aggregation lasts for something like 3 days, a fish would typically stay for less than 1 day. This is very important because when we're seeing 25,000 fish at the aggregation at 81 days, it actually means that there is 3 or 4 times that amount of fish which is participating in the aggregation. In terms of site fidelity, we found that there was very high site fidelity to a particular region, not necessarily to a particular site, but to a particular region of the island, and that the catchment area was quite small. So these research actually led to some decisions, and this is the timeline of the decisions and regulations that came into place. So in 2013, a decision was made for the fishery around these islands to be managed as one, because there were some fish that was crossing over from one island to the other. There was a recommendation in 2014 to control the number of traps used. 2015, measures were introduced in a fishery co-management plan. In 2020, 5 years later, that co-management plan was actually gazetted. 1 year later, regulations came out to control the number of traps that can be used as these sites. In 2022, regulations started implementation, and in 2024, we did a social impact assessment to measure the impact of these measures on fishers, and we found out that there was very little impact and that fishers were very supportive of the management measures. And this is my short presentation, and thank you very much. If you have any questions, I will take them now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bijoux. Wonderful presentation. And we're lucky to have you on the panel for the Q&A very, very soon. You took me back to Ladigue and Praslin, both wonderful islands that I've traveled through. An incredible place, and fantastic to know all about the amazing fisheries spawning aggregation protection work going on there. So next we have a segment on the Gladding Memorial Awards. These awards are very close to the heart of those involved in this area all around the world, particularly in the Caribbean. To introduce the awards, we're going to show you a short video. It's been prepared expertly by Salceda of the Big Fish Initiative. It is a really, really wonderful video. So we're going to watch that now, and then we're going to hear from former Gladding Award winner Mitch Lay, who we're lucky to have here with us today. So let's enjoy the video, and a Salceda of the Big Fish Initiative Gladding Memorial Awards.
For centuries, fish spawning aggregations have been targeted worldwide. And most fisher folk did not even talk with researchers or managers until relatively recently. This unsustainable model has contributed to today's fisheries crises. This is the story of a snapper fisherman that wanted to change that model and the legacy he left for the benefit of reef ecosystems and fishing communities. His name is Peter Gladding, and he brought expert fisher's knowledge and a conservation ethos into the design of a landmark marine reserve, the Dry Tortugas in the South Florida Keys.
Well, it's certainly the biggest success story we have in the Keys is that Tortugas Reserve. And Peter was a huge part of that. That was one of the places he fished, and he knew that that was what needed to be protected. A lot of fish spawned there. And it was kind of, there were people like me involved, but I didn't know exactly where the boundaries ought to be drawn. But Peter, 40 years of fishing there or whatever, he knew, and everyone just sort of deferred to him. And it came out right. It was a success, the way it was drawn up. And he's basically the one that did it. He was the most knowledgeable one, and he brought people together, and he just got it done.
Peter left us way too soon in 2003, but his legacy remains. Inspired by his wisdom, vision, and leadership, since 2004, the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute awards sustainable fishers the Gladding Memorial Award in his memory. There are now 25 GMA winners from 15 countries, making a big difference in their communities and around the region.
Orgullosamente, en el 2010 fui ganadora. Entonces, ahí seguimos en la lucha y humildemente de tratar de hacer lo que hacía este gran señor Peter, ¿verdad? Conservar, porque si nosotros no conservamos y protegemos, no va a haber para mañana, no va a haber para nuestras nuevas generaciones.
Following in Peter's footsteps, these fisher ambassadors have been instrumental in the conservation of spawning aggregations.
We were very successful in finding spawning aggregation site, very successful in lobbying to government officials, putting them in marine protected area. So we start to travel to other countries to help them look for spawning aggregation site and show them the way to go about getting them into marine protected area.
And the fishermen relate to that. They understand. You don't kill them when they're spawning. And of course, when they land that many fish too, the price goes way down, so they're not getting a whole lot for them anyway. So they're kind of, a lot of them are on board with that.
We have about 14 spawning aggregation sites in Belize, and only 2 of them are not in marine protected area. We have worked very hard to get the government to put all of those spawning aggregation sites in marine protected area, and that was a very big accomplishment for us.
Fishers have a huge role to play in the future of fisheries management.
If you don't get organized, you just lose what you have. There are significant areas of engagement that requires the fishers' involvement that no one else can give, because nobody can feel like the fisher. Nobody else knows what the fisher has to encounter on a day-to-day basis, and nobody else knows what it means to be able to provide for the family the way he does, like the fisher. So who can represent that but the fisher?
As Peter dreamed, charismatic fishermen can lead conservation efforts all over the world, just as the GMA winners are doing in the wider Caribbean.
I want the fishermen of the whole world and even the Caribbean to know that whatever we do to the ocean, we're doing it to ourselves. We need to protect the ocean. We need to protect the young juvenile fish. You need to protect the area that they grow, the barn, the hatches, their spawning ground, so we can have the generation to come will able to have fish to eat just like we're having now.
It's good the ocean speaks to a certain potential that seems to be unlimited, both for you and for your community and for your nation. Yeah, responsible sustainable use, yes, because if I don't fish responsibly, I won't have any tomorrow. And I'd love to fish tomorrow.
That is a phenomenal video. Yeah, I would love to fish tomorrow. What a quote. And I'd like to invite now, very lucky to have two former Gladding Award winners on our panel, Mitch Schley and Don DeMaria. If you gents would like to say a few words perhaps about Peter and the awards, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Mitch and Don.
So thanks, Winston. I'll let Don go and he probably can focus a bit on Peter and the awards, and I'll focus a bit on GCFI and how fishers can be involved and things like that. So Don?
Okay. I think Peter Gladding was an unusual fisherman, very well respected. His dream, I think it was, since Will brought him down to the Caribbean to work with some of y'all in the Caribbean, get sustainable fishing going in a lot of different places. He really enjoyed that trip to Belize and the people that he met, and he wanted to move on from there. He told me before he passed away that he was at that point in his life where he could relax a little bit, didn't have to fish as hard, and he really liked traveling around talking to the fishermen. Of course, Peter liked to talk. But I think having said that, with fishermen and their involvement, it's certainly key. But you got to be careful who you get. A lot of them will try to just lead you astray and tell you there's no problems when there's really some problems. But that's one of the reasons why we formed this Gladding thing, is there's a group of fishers that you could rely on to give you an honest answer and work with them. And I think you're not going to find any more honest people than some of those folks we've seen in the Caribbean. Mitch Lay and Andy Maldonado, folks like that, are always going to give you an honest answer, incredible amount of integrity. I think there's also a belief with some people that, well, fishermen are uneducated and they really don't understand the science. And not really true. We got some pretty well-educated people in our group. Mimi Stafford and her husband, they both graduated from college in England, her with a marine science degree and him with a degree in applied mathematics and theoretical physics. So we've got some pretty bright people out there that y'all can work with and take advantage of it. Reach out to the Gladding people in your area and work with them and see who they recommend you talk with if they don't know the answer. So that's all I got to say. You can go from here, Mitch.
Yeah, thanks, Don. And thanks to Will and the others who did that video. It was interesting to see how I've aged from that time. But I still would love to fish tomorrow. Yes. But I want to say that I really want to commend the GCFI, the Gulf and Caribbean Fisheries Institute. I think they're doing a great job, particularly in the context that we don't have the sort of support that we'd love to have to move the fisher component forward. But I just want to highlight a couple of areas that I think are very important initiatives and those things that can lend themselves to some increased participation and also would probably attract the attention of some of those who are able to assist us. So first, I want to say that the Gliding Memorial Award is an excellent initiative that looks at the whole idea of recognizing fisher input, puts value on the fisher's knowledge and his contribution in terms of sustainable and responsible fisheries, and also puts a little highlight on the fisher themselves in terms of the whole management mix of ensuring sustainable fisheries. But I also want to commend the GCFI for the other aspects of the engagement with the fishing communities and particular fishers. And that is the Fisheries Forum, and that is the move to engage fishers in the management scientific components of fisheries management, the research, and that is in relation to the actual GCFI conference on an annual basis. And a lot of our fishers from the Caribbean have benefited from this. The CNFO has made it a point to try and seek funding to ensure exposure of the fishers from the Caribbean to GCFI. And from the reports, the fishers have really benefited in terms of increase in knowledge assets and also increase in an awareness of the importance to actually be engaged in responsible fisheries. So I think this is something that's very important for us to consider, to not only enhance, but also to see how we can garner additional support for those things. But I also want to say that the interaction in terms of looking at how we facilitate a respectful atmosphere, which GCFI does, that includes not only fishers, but also fisheries managers, scientists, and academia. I think that is extremely critical. It builds the fishers' confidence to engage, not only at different levels, but also with different actors who may otherwise be considered in a different category, elitists, etc. So I think those are critical issues that we really need to continue to support, and I really want to commend and applaud GCFI. I know I'll just share a little bit in terms of how we've been able to impact fisheries management as an organization in the Caribbean. So the CNFO, of which I'm the program coordinator, we've been able to directly impact the development of the voluntary guidelines on sustainable small-scale fisheries. We've also engaged in the elaboration of the Caribbean Community Counter Fisheries Policy. And we also are observers to the mechanism, the Caribbean Community CRFM, Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism, which is an advisory body to Caribbean fisheries. And we are also active in terms of WCAPC. So we also have fishers who sit on some of the working groups as well. But we also, of course, identify, just like GCFI, that there are limitations in terms of support, but we see significantly the benefits of fisher engagement. So with those words, I want to leave you to that, commend GCFI and encourage support for GCFI initiatives. And of course, if we can spread the GMA initiative across the globe, that would be great. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you so much, Mitch. And to Mitch and Don, you guys are real role models, right, for fishers all over the world, and honoured to be on this panel with you. Will, you're on screen. Would you like to say anything in reply to Mitch or Don before we move to Q&A?
No, that's fine. I'm just overjoyed that these gentlemen could be here. So, I'll leave my comments till later. And thanks Winston. Thanks, Mitch.
Okay, wonderful. So we have 10 questions. Phenomenal work. Thank you, team. So just on our panel to go back through, we've got Dr. Melita there on the left, Dr. Ken, we've got Mitchell and Don, we've got Kevin Rhodes, we've got Dr. Will, we've got Dr. Jude Bijoux, good to see you, sir, Rick Nemeth and Fadila Ali. So star-studded panel there. Let's go to the first question, all about policy making and enforcement. And thank you, Denise Frederick. You've had some phenomenal questions for the last couple of days. The question is, you as a policymaker, laws and regulations, what are the crucial factors to consider when developing them so that they are friendly to resource users as far as compliance is concerned? Melita, over to you.
Yes, thanks. I'm definitely not going to be able to answer it comprehensively because it's a big question, but I think that one of the key things to have that friendly to resource users is that actually you develop the policy, the laws and the regulations with the fishers. I think we've really reached that stage finally in the 21st century that you don't create your regulations and policies without consulting the fishers who are doing the fishing. I think we're really trying to move to that in Kenya. I know you're from Kenya. And I think we have a great opportunity to do this around FSAs if we can get a bit more research going on them. As you would have heard from Jude, you know, one of our main fisheries, the rabbitfish, forms spawning aggregations, and there's nothing in the regulations on that. So the research has been done. It's been done in Kenya, but it hasn't moved. And I think the only way we can do that is really working with fishers. So I just want to put a real plug in for that. I think we have to do that. It's enshrined in so much global policy now about cooperative, collaborative development of rules and regulations around fisheries with fishers. So it should be fishers and government together, and NGO types can help. You know, they're the little guys helping here and there, but the key people are government and fishers. You can't leave them out of the equation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Melita. And yes, I agree. Similar to New Zealand, the co-management model, and I'm sure you could come up with a all singing, all dancing enforcement strategy with land, sea, and air covered. Sounds a bit like a Hollywood movie, but as Dr. Melita said, I think we're moving past that now. The next question from an anonymous attendee. When we do a questionnaire survey to fishers nowadays, they would like to be paid. Sorry, I heard a noise.
Yeah, Winston, sorry. I just wanted to add something to Melita's intervention, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, so I'm completely on board with that intervention. The only issue that I've noticed recently is that when we do consultations, a lot of times the fishers are not informed on the topic or the subject area sufficiently well to contribute meaningfully. So, and we have this also in some policy structures. So when we do this type of engagement, we make an effort to have meaningful and informed participation of fishers. And therefore, that sometimes require some pre-consultation activities to ensure that fishers build their knowledge assets, not just in their fishing areas, but the other associate areas that impact management. So factors such as biology, such as some socioeconomic issues, things like that are important for meaningful and informed engagement. So that is critical, because now consultation is a broad brush, but we really want to have fishers on board fully at the end when we have the results. So a meaningful and informed participation is a key element for me. And I think I wanted to add that. Sorry to disturb you, but I think it's important. Thanks.
No, not at all. It's a very respectful point, right? And on any of these committees, it's the respectful thing to do, right? Send the agenda well in advance and make it clear what's being discussed. Does anybody else want to comment on this question? Okay, cool. Let's move to the next one. So it's about fishers wanting to be paid to answer questionnaires. An interesting question. Perhaps let's hear from one of our researchers, and then perhaps let's hear from Mitch and Don for a differing perspective on that one. So, Will, you've spent a lot of time in the field in many places. Would you like to comment on that?
I can briefly. Looks like Rick has his hands up as well. Cool. What do they call that? Interview fatigue. We've seen it a lot. These fishing communities, young graduate students, interviewing these old-time guys who have had 40 interviews in the past, and they're like, yeah. So I get it, and many of the fishers that I've seen kind of enduring this see it as their role to help educate young scientists, and they're okay with it. But I get it that it gets old after a while. So I don't know. That's my perspective. Paying people for information, I get it. I'd rather the way I've taken that myself is interview people, take their information, and of those people that I've interviewed, find those that seem the most engaged and the most knowledgeable, and hire them on my research team. So over to you, Rick.
Yeah, thanks, Will. This is sort of an indirect answer to the question. So I've been kind of dealt with the same situation, doing a lot of catch and release tagging. And so when the fishermen catch or tagged fish, there's a reward associated with returning the tag with information. And often they're hesitant, $20 for the reward is not really a great incentive. But colleagues and myself, we've sometimes used like hats or caps or shirts that have a nice logo that sort of put them above, the other fishermen. If they're engaged in the fishery and they get a cool cap that has a nice logo or something on it, they're more likely to participate, maybe answer questionnaires, or return the tags if on a catch and release fishery. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So if you can come up with creative ways that is different from the previous questionnaire person, they might be more interested in doing that.
Thanks so much, Rick. Mitch or Don, do you want to say anything on this point? I mean, certainly not at your end from the sounds.
Yeah, well, personally, I'm not fussy about payment for information. I mean, freely you receive, so freely give. But I can understand a fisher's perspective, because they actually have to stop what they're doing to deal with you. But personally, I give freely, so you can approach me on any matter.
Thanks so much, Mitch.
I feel the same way that Mitch does. I do a lot of stuff for free, but some fishermen, they're still fishing full time, 100% of the time, and expect them to drop what they're doing to sit down for an interview or to take you out on their boat for free is sometimes asking a bit much from these guys. And I think you lose a lot of really good people by just expecting them to do it for free all the time. But yeah, I get it. It's hard to drop what you're doing and just take a day off to answer questions. So if they could be paid, that would be good. I'm not sure how to do it or where the money would come from, but everyone else is getting paid, the researchers and stuff. So for the fishermen, it's not unreasonable. I just don't know where the money would come from.
Thanks so much, Don and Mitch. And we've got Kevin, Professor Kevin Rhodes. Would you like to say some words?
Yeah, thanks, Winston. I just wanted to say that not only is it taking up time, but a lot of times when we're asking these questions, that's at the end of a fishing session, when they've been out on the water for hours and hours, getting beat by sun and wind. rain or whatever. And so it's reasonable in a way to ask for some kind of compensation, but I'm kind of with Rick on that. It's usually a better reward to give them something they can use other than a direct payment. It's also very hard for some funding agencies to justify that. They don't like to see that in our proposals. And so we have to be very careful on our end as well when we're making payments directly to fishermen.
Thanks so much. And Dr. Melita, you've got a point to add.
Actually, mainly there's a response from Jude to another question, which is actually very related to this. So I just wanted to point that out in case, because he's answered it in text, but it's kind of a key issue, and it was the question from Evelyn: how receptive were the trap fishers in Seychelles to the management measures, and which factors contributed to their willingness to comply to the measures? So it's not exactly being paid for doing questionnaires, but it's a sort of mix of their time and then the previous point we were talking about, which was developing legislation. Anyway, I just thought you might just allow Jude to say his reply, which I think is really nice for everybody to hear.
Yes, please, Dr. Jude, we'd love to hear from you, sir.
Thank you, Melita, for bringing up the point. In the Seychelles, our approach was quite different. We started our work with fishers at a time when there was very little communication between the fishers and the Fisheries Management Authority. There was actually a lot of aggression between fishers and the staff of Management Authority. We remember that the first day on the site, we had fishers that were actually dropping fish trap on us. They were aiming for us to drop the fish trap. But we over the couple of months, we tried to bridge the gap. How we bridge the gap is that at that time, there were research grants that were available for associations like fishers associations, but they had very little capacity to put together research grants. So we worked with them in designing a research project that was of interest to them. They had a lot of questions that they wanted to answer with regards to the fishery that they were conducting. So I went there, I helped them, we sat down together to define the research question. We got the funds, the associations administered the funds, and they were paid to participate in the research. Not really to participate, but as service providers. So we used their boats to do the fishing, to do the sampling, and they got paid for that. So they were involved in the research from the start, and they saw the amount of fish that we caught. They saw the fidelity to the different sites. And when we presented the results back to them, they wanted to make something of the results. So they are the ones who actually came up with proposed solutions. And one of the proposed solutions was to limit the number of traps at individual spawning aggregation sites. It took 9 years, but finally that measure started implementation in the Seychelles last year. And I was involved in a social impact assessment this year, and it shows that the measure is having no negative impact on fishers, and they actually like it because it is preserving the resource on which they depend. So the key is to get them involved and be sincere about their involvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jude. And there's actually a second question for you about mesh size used in the Seychelles. What is the minimum trap mesh size used in the Seychelles to make the rabbit fishery sustainable?
Okay. Okay, thank you. The mesh size for now is 40 millimeter. It's been like this for years, donkey's years, and it is quite effective for rabbit fish because they have kind of broad body, but not as effective for other species such as mullet. But the good thing with the Seychelles in terms of the rabbit fish aggregation fishery is that there are a lot of aggregation sites, and it is only a few sites that are close to the shorelines which are targeted. Most of the sites are not known. And one of the things that we wanted to do at one point was to use side scan sonar to map the area and pick up granite reefs at depths of more than 18 meters, because these are the characteristics spawning aggregation sites. So I think it will be quite easy to identify them, but if there is any benefit for fisheries management, I am not sure at the moment.
Thank you, Dr. Jude. And we have a hand up from Rick Nemeth.
Yeah, thanks, Winston. I want to make a quick comment. We had a study done here in the Virgin Islands by their local Fish and Wildlife Department that used fishers to test different types of escape panels in their traps to release some juvenile fishes. And we found a very high significant difference in the escape panel that was sort of tall and thin, maybe 5 to 7 meters tall and a couple centimeters wide. And that allowed many of the surgeonfish, butterfly fish, the taller bodied juveniles to get out of the traps, because as you know, when they get brought up from deep water, many of them embolize and are just thrown over as dead bycatch. So there's different ways that you can implement more effective, more targeted trap fishing to be more selective in what gets caught.
Fantastic interjection, Rick. Thank you so much. Right, we have 2 more questions. We're going to go a little bit over. Apologies, everybody, but I think this discussion is incredibly useful. So let's keep going. We have a question here. Great talks. How can technology such as eDNA be further optimized for monitoring spawning aggregations? Who would like to have a stab at that one? Rick, fantastic.
Yeah, I can try that. So we actually tried that with some colleagues in Puerto Rico, and it was not very successful. You know, there's hundreds of groupers around, so we took water samples and then tested those water samples, and the signature did not come out. So
interesting.
So it was a very sort of proof of concept study to see if it worked. We haven't tried it again with modified methods, but the initial attempt did not work. So just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, it's a newish, I guess, a newish type area of science and study that's sort of evolving, right? Right, we have a question here about the Red Sea, where I am, and I think it's asking about the demand for seafood within Saudi Arabia and where that may come from. Also, there's a Saudi Vision 2030 with some really solid targets around aquaculture, and there will be some aquaculture development along the Red Sea coast. So that may answer that part of the question. And in terms of increasing the value of the fish that's caught, there's some really good apps these days on fisheries traceability. So tracing the fish from the actual fisherman, seeing the fisherman, see where he's caught the fish, all the way through to the high-end hotels. So that's another way of increasing the value that we're looking at. Does anybody else want to comment on that? If not, we may move to the closing. So been a wonderful, wonderful 2 days, and I would like to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Will Heyman, to lead the closing remarks from our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Winston, and thanks, everyone. Just a few words of closing. The conveners, all of us, the presenters, the panelists, we've emphasized the global importance of SSG species and their spawning aggregations for fisheries, communities, biodiversity and marine resilience. But, you know, in putting this together, we also realized that there was a wealth of knowledge out there and experience on the subject around the world, but it was disparate and largely unavailable to most practitioners and managers. Even scientists are not aware of what's happening all around the world. So we hope you appreciate what we're trying to do here in terms of building a global community of practice, kind of netting us all together as fishermen, as scientists in terms of communication, practitioners, but also policymakers and funders. We hope to draw in more and more, and any other concerned individuals and institutions, including commercial fishing industry, tourism, et cetera. So in saying that, you know, we're trying to create new linkages, new opportunities for collaboration and shared experiences, monitoring courses, exchanges, et al. So, you know, in saying that, one of the things that we're trying to do is to provide resources for everyone to be able to have that available. And if I can be enabled in terms of screen sharing, I'd like to show some of these resources that we have available. One of them is the is this Whova website right away. And so, and the network it's created, we've got an ability to communicate on the Whova website, send messages, do polls, and it will be available to anyone that registered through January 25. Host disabled participant screen sharing. All right, well, I think I will not be sharing my screen, but we will go ahead and share the websites, two crucial websites, one from the SURFA, which has a bunch of existing resources, all kinds of manuals and toolkits and wonderful things, but also the Big Fish Initiative workshop. And we're grateful to Anna Salceda and the Big Fish team who put that together. It's amazing. I wish I could share it with you, but we will share it in the chat. And,
you can share, Will.
Oh, there we go. Okay, lovely. Boom. Let's see. Don't want to belabor this. So here's the SURFA website. Can you see that? Okay, cool. So yeah, an amazing resource. It's been referred to multiple times. You can see the database that's here that is the best data out there. It's also being updated. Wonderful basic information, some of which was presented here, but also lots of the basics in terms of how to manage and study aggregations, et cetera. They've also got a resource library, phenomenal resource. We've got board members on this. Both Rick and Kevin are board members. We've also had Yvonne, who's chaired this for a long time, helping present. So this is a magnificent resource that I want you to be aware of and to share with colleagues. And then this one, this is a brand new resource from the Big Fish Initiative. And here's the let's see, the front page. You know, again, it's been designed for the wider Caribbean. And yet they've been kind enough to create a specific page for our workshop. And so that is here. Let's see, decision makers, fishers, folks, regional management plan. Sorry, never share your screen live. So anyway, there is a, okay, you could register for the toolkit. Sorry, you've seen this, decision makers. So here we go, the resource library. So there's a specific page for this workshop, and it'll also take you to this amazing resource library that offers protocols and management plans and scientific papers, searches. We are trying to harvest everything and more that's been put together on this workshop here in this toolkit. Again, we're grateful to Anna Salceda that put that GMA video together and has been the driving force behind this website. So just to wrap it up, I want to pass this over to Ken Lindeman. But before I do so, I want to recognize Ken as the person or one of the several small group of people that helped put together the GMA process in the very beginning and chaired the GMA working group, for the first 10 years. So Ken, sorry for my long words. Let me pass it over to you.
Thank you, Will. Your words are wonderful. I didn't chair it for the first 10 years. You took over after about the first 6, but thank you. And it's just really wonderful to see Mitch and Don. So folks, we're going to close very soon. Thank you for those closing comments, Will. I have very brief comments, then Melita, and then Winston. And thanks again, Fadila, for everything. Attendees, we thank you very much for your interest. We highly value your participation. The 6 families in the IUCN Snapper, Seabream, and Grunt Specialist Group are diverse, ecologically critical, fished everywhere, have high economic value, and are iconic in some regions, over 560 species. We look forward to learning more and doing more to sustain these important species. This workshop assembled diverse and inspirational examples of how fishers and scientists have worked together. As Will has mentioned, these presentation materials and other materials are going on to the outstanding relaunched Big Fish website. The Hoover site is open till the end of the year. When you're on that Big Fish Initiative website, look for the Global FSA workshop. That's where you will find many of these materials, the Global FSA workshop page. Thanks again to Anna Salceda and Zelda Alesko of the Big Fish Initiative. An explicit goal of the workshop is to engage and incentivize sustainable fishers. This was hit on repeatedly in the Q&A and in many talks, but we really want to drive home. In the proposal to the IUCN to fund this, we emphasized that hopefully folks in the Caribbean, where many of us are located, certainly not all, but beyond, things like the Gliding Memorial Award can be transferred, grown in their own culturally specific manner elsewhere in the world. Any kinds of tools to incentivize more collaboration between fishers and scientists are badly needed. Someday there may be better incentives even than the Gliding Memorial Award. They may be in other oceans. We hope for that. Thanks again to the guest presenters who mobilized in very short order for incredible presentations. And thanks again to our workshop funders, the IUCN Species Survival Commission and Cordio through a grant from Milky Wire. Melita.
Thanks, Ken and Will, but particularly thanks to all the attendees who have joined us for the last 2 days. I'm just going to add a few words on the community of practice that Will mentions. I feel very strongly about that. I think it's really important. As a reef fish scientist from Kenya, but I have previous FSA research experience on groupers in the Pacific. I tried to get work going on FSAs in the late 2000s in Kenya with Jan Robinson from Seychelles. But we've had great difficulty in maintaining an interest in this topic in mainland East African countries ever since. In contrast, as you've just heard from Jude Bijoux, who was part of our team back then, the work has really progressed in the Seychelles with that important fishery. We have the same fishery in Kenya and in Tanzania. So we really need help from a global community of practice in many countries in the Western Indian Ocean, because we still have a really small knowledge base. And in many areas, we're working with very overfished fish populations in coastal waters. So we need to fast track our research and our management, which is quite challenging, seeing we've got the least information on FSAs. However, we do have examples of working closely with fishers in the management of our small-scale fisheries, and we've got lots of examples of that. So I think that's a real plus for us. And that leads me to the training. The team that have put this workshop together, so that's Ken Lindeman, Will Heyman, Winston, Cowie, and myself, we really want to provide more training in 2025, but it will need funding. So we'd really like to do some training activities in situ. We'd like to make sure manuals are rolled out at these, and also that we do exchange visits. So I just want you all to know that's what we're aiming for. And if you've got ideas on funding or you want to engage, please get in touch. And once again, thanks so much for coming. And please keep focusing on our SSG species. We really, really need to focus on them where I come from. Thank you. I think Winston?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Melita. So picking up on that and the community of practice, I think one of the key things that's come out is that there's so many people around that have done this successfully, right? Attending for the last couple of days. We've also, in the IUCN guidelines, got lists of regional experts from all over the world who have given freely their contact details, who are there to help. So if anybody's in a part of the world that hasn't done much on spawning aggregations, I think Professor Yvonne in her talk hit on it. I mean, they set up that informal working group 10 years ago, and informal's fine, right? It's about getting the right people to work together and pull in the right direction. Big thanks to everybody who's attended. I mean, I've learned a huge amount from everybody, and particular thanks to co-trainers, absolute legends, Dr. Melita, Dr. Lindeman, Will Heyman, and the wonderful Fadila. Thank you, and forwards.